Whew, it is cold out in the shop. Today, I'm going to be working on this old Linde 225 MIG welder. I'm hoping to get it up and running so that way I can hopefully work on building a waste oil heater and maybe warm the shop up a little bit, which would be really nice. First off, if you're anything like me, then you probably love a great marketplace find. When I drove home with this 30-plus-year-old welder, I thought I had scored the jackpot, as it came with a C25 tank, which is the gas required to run a MIG welder, and a 25-foot extension cord. But you're about to find out why this might not necessarily be the bargain that I had anticipated. This was the day of arrival, and I had picked up the welder and was eager to get it on the ground and running. I was unable to test the welder as it was at a residential location and there were no accessible 240 volt outlets. I knew this was a bit of a risk, but given the overall condition of the welder, it did seem to have been well taken care of. That being said, there were a few red flags. So at this point, I was eager to find out if the purchase was a bargain or a total flop. And this was not the result I was hoping for. To get started with, I'm really just trying to find anything that could potentially cause a bad ground. Every once in a while it won't arc right away, so it makes tack welding really difficult. I did notice on the extension cord that came with the welder, right here you can see a shiny area, which is what this whole terminal should look like. So the terminals are a bit corroded. I'm gonna go ahead and start off just cleaning these up. I'm gonna do the same thing on the cord that comes directly off the welder, and we'll see, maybe that's all it needs to make it work a little bit better. I'll go ahead and show you why I'm so concerned about the corrosion on the pins of the welder plug. I have this multimeter set up to buzz when there is continuity. Basically, when I touch these together, you'll hear a buzz. Now, if I put both of these on either side of the ground plug, you'll notice that I'm not getting a buzz. And we'll try this with the other pins as well. So that's all three pins. We'll go ahead, clean these three up, and then we'll do the same experiment. And ideally, you'll hear the multimeter buzz on each of the pins. To start with, I am disassembling the extension cord so I can easily clean the corrosion off of each terminal. This is a close-up of the terminal prior to cleaning, and it is in obvious need of a little elbow grease. I used a Dremel with an abrasive pad, which made quick work of removing the corrosion. You can see a significant difference in color between the clean and corroded side of the terminal. I will now finish cleaning up the remaining sides to make sure this terminal shines bright like a diamond. I do apologize. I'll make sure that is the only Rihanna reference in this video. And after finishing up the other two sides, we are looking really good. I then ran a file through all three female terminals from the other end of the extension cord, and then moved on to cleaning up the terminals on the welder plug. Again, you can see the obvious difference between a freshly cleaned region and the original corroded surface. I continued to clean with the Dremel and eventually switched over to a Scotch-Brite pad to get into the tight spaces. Overall, I am very happy with the final appearance. Now that I have all of the contacts on the welder cable nice and shiny, we'll go ahead and run the same test we did before. So I was able to hear the buzzing on all three contacts. That tells me that we've cleaned off all of the corrosion that would have prevented a good electrical contact between the cable and the next plug we would go into. So I'm really hopeful maybe this is all we needed to do. I guess now it's time to just try it out. When I tried to run the welder, the wire feed motor quit working on me partway through, and it turns out that I blew the fuse for the wire feed. It is a 10 amp slow blow fuse. I wasn't able to find any locally, but I was able to order a few on Amazon. So we'll go ahead and put a new fuse in here and then try it out. I believe the reason the fuse blew is it's so cold out here that the probably the grease that's lubricating the gears for the wire feed motor is so cold that it's causing a lot of friction. So I'm actually going to heat this up with a heat gun. And once I've got it to the point where it's not so cold, then we'll go ahead and try and weld. Time to warm everything up. That feels better. I think I've got things warmed up enough that hopefully that won't happen again. So let's go ahead and try welding. After cleaning up the terminals on the welder plug, it is now running much smoother. The arc has a much smoother sound than it did before, so I'm really happy with that. Unfortunately, I can tell there is still some sort of grounding issue as the arc initiation is not nearly as smooth as I think it should be. Once it starts welding, it seems to clean up pretty nice, but there is still something that's not quite right. And I'm thinking what may be going on is where this is an older machine, it's possible that throughout all the various connection points, there may be a little bit of corrosion buildup. So as opposed to having one single bad ground, it might be a little bit of resistance adding up throughout the machine. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is just cleaning up each of those contact points. And I'm hoping after I clean all those up that maybe that'll resolve the issue that I'm currently having. So let's get to it. I will start off by removing the exterior panel and then run some preliminary resistance checks from the ground clamp to the bridge rectifier. This gives me an initial value to compare against to see if I'm making any improvements with the work I am doing. I then removed the ground cable and cleaned up the terminal. There were a few connections on the other side preventing the inductor from being removed, so I switched sides to remove those bolts. After removal, I was then able to pull out the inductor and clean up all of the current carrying paths connecting to and from the inductor. I will admit this is a little tedious, but I do want to clean up all accessible connections while I am in here. I then ran a resistance check to make sure the inductor was in good health, and of course it's always good to clean things up a bit when the opportunity presents itself. Moving over to the other side, I am now removing the capacitor bank and doing a resistance check on each terminal to determine if there is a layer of corrosion that would be preventing a strong electrical connection. I then cleaned up the capacitor terminals, and that definitely seemed to help. I then cleaned up the copper strips that link all of the capacitors. This is a real quick demonstration to show how cleaned sections of the copper have a low resistance and the untouched area results in a higher resistance. You can see that overload is displayed on the multimeter when touching the black probe around the slightly corroded portion of the copper. At some points, the reading drops down, and this is a result of the probe making contact with the clean portion of copper. When I move the probe over to the cleaned area, you'll see that the resistance immediately drops to 0. It's now time to remove the bridge rectifier, and you guessed it, I am checking for corrosion and cleaning up everything I can get my frozen fingers on. I had to partially disassemble the bridge rectifier inside the welder in order to remove it. I highly recommend taking photos throughout any type of disassembly process as it makes the reassembly go much smoother.
I am also cleaning up the connections for the heat range selector, which allows the user to adjust the voltage between the electrode and workpiece. I disassembled and cleaned up all internal connections off camera, and this did result in a big improvement for that part.
I've been working away just cleaning up all of the copper connections on this welder, anywhere where there's a lot of current that would be passing through. Here's an example. You can kind of see where it's been cleaned up. Let me see, this might be a better location. You can see the difference in color. So anywhere where there's a copper to copper connection, I've tried to clean that off and hopefully reduce any resistance that would build up throughout the system. There are quite a few locations where you have these copper to copper connections, and I imagine if there's a few ohms of resistance at each one throughout the machine, you might end up with enough resistance to be causing the grounding issues that I seem to be having. So now that I'm pretty well done with that, I am gonna real quick show you part of the bridge rectifier on this welder. These are two of the main diodes that convert the AC power to DC power for the MIG welding. And since I have it out and it's real easy, I'll just show you how I checked that these diodes were in good condition. There may be other ways to do it that are better. I have a multimeter with the diode setting, so we'll go ahead and use that and verify that they appear to be okay. To start with, we're first going to put the multimeter in the diode check mode. The next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we'll take our leads. We'll put one, I know you can't see this side, but I'll put one on this side of the diode and the other on this side of the diode. And the multimeter is reading overload. So we'll switch these. Do the same thing. And this should be the forward voltage of the diode, which is 0.427. So if we go over to the next diode, we'll do the same thing. And we're getting 0.431. Now we'll reverse them. In this direction, we should get overload, which we do. And that tells me that these two diodes are working the way they're supposed to. Basically, the way a diode works is it will allow the current to flow in one direction but not the other. And that's what we want. There are two other diodes which I've gone ahead and checked off camera. But if you have a MIG welder and you need to double check your diodes, give that a shot. So I've disassembled the welder a lot more than I had really originally intended. Mainly I just wanted to get in, clean up all the connection points, and in order to get to a few of those, I just had to start pulling a few more things out than I ever really planned on. So while I'm here, I'll go ahead and show you what the welder looks like now, and then I'm going to go ahead and start putting everything back in it. This is our main transformer. The inductor would sit right in here. I've got that sitting right over here. You can see I've cleaned up the connection points on that. And then on this side, the rectifier will sit right in here, and then the capacitors will sit right over here. I've got the capacitors right behind the heater. So I've cleaned up the connections on those and they're ready to go back in as well. So now I'll go ahead and get it all back together. So I just finished getting the welder all back together. There were no extra bolts, which is always a great thing. And I've got it hooked up to a piece of metal. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on, and fingers crossed, I really hope I still don't have any grounding issues. I'm really hoping something I did fixed the issue I was having, but let's go ahead and see. I am happy to report that after getting this welder back together, it is running much better. I don't know if I can say that it's 100% off the line, brand new. But again, this is a 39-year-old welder, and it is running, and it is running well. So please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can join in on all of my Back 40 ventures.